Welcome everybody to a new edition of the Design and Democracy Digital Talk Series, and a especially warm welcome to the participants of the Design Campus Summer School 2021. Hi everybody. My name is Amelie Klein. I'm a design curator, and together with my colleague Vera Zacchetti, I curated the summer school. The Design Campus is a curatorial-driven, interdisciplinary, and future-oriented platform for rethinking some of the most pressing questions of our times through the lens of design. It was launched this summer at the Dresden Kunstgewerbemuseum at Pillnitz Palace and Park with the summer school. So we dedicated this inaugural edition of the summer school to design and democracy, because democracy and its current crisis are arguably one of the most urgent issues of our times, and because we think that design is an important starting point for an analysis and discussion about this crisis. So the summer school started on July 18th. We're now in week 4, and we will continue until August 28th. This week, the Design Campus Summer School investigates matters of solidarity, both embodied and in innovative settings. We look at how to connect meaningfully through design and why we should aim for solidarity rather than empathy. So this is where I would like to turn over the mic to Vera Zacchetti, who will introduce our amazing speaker for tonight's lecture.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am absolutely delighted to introduce to you Panthea Lee. We have invited Panthea to speak in this digital lecture series because her work, her thinking has been quite instrumental in the way that Amelie and myself view matters related to the topics of the summer school. Most importantly, and that was quite crucial for our process in putting together the summer school, was a text that Panthea wrote in the last day of December 31st, 2020. She published it on her Medium account, Towards the Politics of Solidarity and Joy. And this was a text that absolutely was instrumental for us. And we have since then been very interested in having Panthea participate in this lecture series. Panthea is, of course, a strategist, curator, organizer, and facilitator working on issues of structural justice and healing democracy. She's currently the executive director at Reboot. She's a fellow at the Center for Science and Imagination at Arizona State University, and she serves on the boards of the Laundromat Project, the Royal Society of Arts in the US, the Development Gateway, and People Powers, the global hub for participatory democracy. Panthea is, of course, going to tell us about solidarity, and her talk was initially titled "Enjoyous Solidarity," but things in the last couple of weeks, last couple of days have taken less joyous turns, and I believe Panthea will be speaking to us about these matters. Panthea, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here today, and we can't wait to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you so much both for having me here. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you all. I will start by sharing my screen. And let's see. Can you all see that? Perfect. Yeah, so I think when I had initially planned for this talk, and I was working on this last week, it was titled "Enjoyous Solidarity," and I think you're meeting me today very much active in my practice of trying to find and reclaim that joy that I know is essential for our survival, for our continued fight in a greedy, imperialist, oppressive society. But that's not where I'm at today, right now. And so I ask everyone just to check in with themselves as we begin, and ask yourself, how is your heart today? Take a moment, just take a deep breath. I am Panthea Lee. I'm the daughter of Mingying and Dezhen. I was born in Taipei, Taiwan in 1983, and today I'm currently based on the land of the Ohlone people, also known as Berkeley, California, though I'm usually on the land of the Munsee Lenape, currently known as Brooklyn, New York. My pronouns are she and they, and I have long black hair, light brown colored skin, and I'm wearing a blue shirt and silver earrings. It's been a hard few days. Today is August 18th, 2021. And these are images from our world over the last few days. This is currently taken in Haiti after the earthquake. These are the fires in Greece. And content warning for folks that might be having been triggered from the last few days. These images are from the airport in Kabul. Not sure if folks have seen, but there have been really heartbreaking and distressing images coming out of Afghanistan in the last few days with the US withdrawal, the Taliban taking over major cities and Kabul, and folks desperate to flee and get out. And so I'm sure folks have been following the news, but it's been chaotic and heartbreaking. And I think a lot of folks are, saying it is shocking, it is depressing, how could this have happened? And I think this is something we should explore and we will get into. My heart's been in Afghanistan the last few days. And I wanted to start with something that I wrote, because I think for me, today talking about the concept of solidarity, given my relative privilege as a person living in the United States with my basic security needs taken care of, I think for me, solidarity means many things, but it's often also been about lifting up other voices. But I think sometimes it is also about sharing that which we have borne witness to. So just with that, I've been asking myself, why do I get to be that person who, and actually just for context, I have done work in Afghanistan. This is a photo from Jalalabad, about 80 miles east of Kabul, where this is from probably about 2010 or so. And I ask myself, why do I get to be that person that gets on the plane, that gets to walk in with the entire day's stories, its tragedies, its heartbreaks, and all the things that we cannot fix? I get to take a hot shower with the tragedies washing down the drain, order room service, Kabuli pulao or lamb biryani, decadent mutton. I get to sleep. I get to pick up my passport, the right passport, my ticket to freedom, walk out, check out, and get on the flight out. Why do I get to be here? Getting to feel so safe, so secure, so open to possibilities, when my sisters in Mazar just got a bullseye fixed upon their forehead for daring to dream of a future where their daughters could learn, could ask questions, could be curious. I can't eat the grape and not taste its sweetness without remembering that 48% of Afghanistan's fruit-bearing land is dedicated to grapes. I cannot cut the mango into three, peel off the $1.29 sticker without thinking that they are nothing like the Nur Jahan mangoes from Afghanistan, now only cultivated in the Katiwada region of Alijapur district adjacent to the Gujarat border of India. A Nur Jahan mango can grow up to a foot long, and its kernels weigh between 150 to 200 grams, local cultivators claimed. They fetch as high as 1,000 rupees, or $13.46. 47.3% of the Afghani population lives below the poverty line. That is less than $1.29 a day. One Nur Jahan mango today costs a week's wages. For the fruits of Afghanistan have been stolen and extracted. This is not the $1.29 mango that I'm just eating, for Berkeley does not know and does not deserve to know the sweetness, the sacrosanct sweetness of Nur Jahan. Over my career, I've been working on these sets of issues. And I have often, or I guess when I first started, worked on them through a design lens. This is my training. This is my background. I started as a journalist and as an ethnographer, but over time I got sick of writing about the issues and I wanted to do something about them. And early on, design seemed like a very attractive and very promising way of breaking down systems, breaking down problems, centering humans, which is what I'd been taught as a journalist, and then using that to feed into systems of power. I wrote and preached the gospel of design research, using empathy as a primary processing tool by which we can step in others' shoes and then find ways to present these stories so that the world, those in power, those with economic and political power would do something. And with this belief in empathy, in human stories, I travel the world. I've done this work in about 40 countries, working for these types of organizations, usually funded by private foundations, international agencies, but often working with activists, organizers, community groups, and of course, governments. And I would take these stories and I would take them back to institutions that looked like this. I would take them to these boardrooms, or informally, I would take them to rooms like this, where I would, armed with my presentations and personas and systems maps and reports, I would go and say, this is how things are working, and this is how they are broken, and this is why we must change. And I have been working with these institutions for about 15 years, designing services, advocating for policies, setting up new initiatives around the world to bring change. And over time, I have become very skeptical of using empathy as a primary tool of bringing about transformation. I think the sense of unease started sort of many years ago, but it really codified and solidified during the Trump administration. After Donald Trump was elected in 2016, we saw an outpouring of protests all around the US saying, love trumps hate. For Trump's message was one of misogyny, of xenophobia, of racism, of ableism. This was just a very hateful man that seemed to have little or no empathy for anyone that did not look a certain way, the way that power and privilege has traditionally looked. Protests everywhere said, make empathy great again, a play, of course, on Trump's own slogan. And we thought empathy would save us if we just got one another to care more. If we just were able to instill a politics of empathy on the American body public, surely this would make things better. Well, you know, political winds shift one way and the other. And the campaign of Joe Biden was actually really hinged then on empathy. He read the political winds. He read what sort of folks were asking for. Certainly not all Americans, but many that were shocked and dismayed and horrified and heartbroken and attacked, and said, so he ran on empathy. And all of his supporters came out and said, wow, Joe Biden is such an empathetic man. Empathy matters, compassion matters. We have to reach out and understand one another to be able to heal this country. And sure enough, empathy won the day for Joe Biden. You know, folks talked about his sense of compassion, his humaneness. Yeah, much has been made of Joe Biden. And I think, I mean, presidents are difficult, aren't they? They are the representatives and the puppets of an entire system. This is Joe Biden in the last few days, after the US botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. There have been all the reasons. There have been all the excuses, and I think folks are rightly asking many questions. I think what strikes me, and I think what is a lesson to all of us, is we cannot rest individual decisions and sort of hinge our hopes on justice, on structural justice, on equity, on single humans, on empathy, because at the end of the day, empathy as a tool for transformation perpetuates the myth of single and often external saviors. Politicians will do this for us, or designers, you know. Trisha Wong recently wrote a great article about the bullshit of how might we. I think it's in Fast Company. Designers love using how might we. How might we do X and Y? Who gets to decide who the we is? Often in the room when we are saying how might we, are we the ones that should be solving these problems? Who else should be in there? Who else should we be talking to? Because so often it limits the agency and it reduces the responsibility of most of us. I think watching the events of the last few days, many of us feel distraught, feel overwhelmed, feel depressed, feel unable to summon the energy. And I think what has happened over time is we have abstracted these systems of capitalism and of empire so that we are all cogs in these wheels, and we are all sad, but no one's taking responsibility. It is all someone else's fault. And all we can do is care and look at the sad images and feel empathetic. And I think this is wrong. About 2 years ago, I heard the art historian Aruna D'Souza gave a really fantastic talk. And I think the subtitle was basically "Empathy is Bullshit." And she said something that has stuck with me ever since. She stood on stage at a social justice art conference and said, "I do not want to wait for people to develop empathy for me until I am treated as a full human being." A politics based on empathy imagines justice as something to be bestowed by newly enlightened individuals on other lesser individuals and communities. A politics of empathy allows those called upon to be empathetic to remain in a position of supremacy, doling out justice as a matter of kindness. And I think this is what we're currently seeing now with the conversations around our responsibility, US responsibility. How do we send the military jets? How do we get people out? How do we, look at the poor Afghan, this terrible situation, how do we just get them out? And we're taking an ahistorical perspective that is based on our empathy and our kindness in this moment without truly grappling with the long history beyond the 20-year occupation of how the US has supported the Taliban, funded Osama bin Laden. This long history, how Afghanistan has ties to Iraq, why it was used as a distraction, all of these things. George W. Bush is now saying he is very disheartened and dismayed. We're taking a look at things based on individual ahistoric perspectives and not grappling with what we have, the havoc and the pain and the suffering we have inflicted, and now using empathy as basically our get out of jail card to say we are doing the best we can, we are processing the visas as fast as we can, we are dealing with the refugees, and this is not good enough. Oh my gosh, I don't even remember what was that about. So, And I want to look at this pernicious myth a little bit more around why it is that we talk about empathy as a solution, around empowerment as a solution. And I want to put this in context of an ethnography that I conducted of a major US federal agency that works on issues of global justice and governance and human development. And this map basically is what a way that I put together of trying to examine the difference between rhetoric and reality. So policy and implementation in global development. So you see on the bottom axis here, the x-axis, I'm trying to map sort of the understanding of complexity or tolerance of ambiguity in the implementing context. And then on the left, I'm on the y-axis, I'm mapping the direct impact of these actors on, development outcomes. Sorry, the language is perhaps more technical because this is made for an internal audience. And what I want to point out is that in most work, whether it's in global development, whether it's in a lot of social good design, whatnot, we often say our intention is to empower and to facilitate the development of local communities, local actors, Afghani women, Afghani children, Afghani girls. We're there to support, we're there to sort of build the nation. And then so all of our work, all of this money, we're spending to identify and pursue opportunities to do so. We're going to build schools, we're going to do this, we're going to address the barriers, we're going to train the police forces, whatnot. That is the stated intention. And there's a whole ecosystem of contractors and defense and development and whatnot that benefit hugely from the stated intention. But here's the thing, these folks that are spending sort of all the money to do this, they have very little, you can see they have very little, on the left, on the bottom, the donor legislative body, whether that's Congress, whatever your legislative body is, has very little understanding of what's going on. Up through the White House, you don't necessarily have a deep understanding of what's going on in the local context. The reality, however, is that we're actually reporting and justifying upstream. We're justifying how much is this done for, the US, for whatever country, how much have we benefited from it, from sort of arms sales, from whatnot, and the whole ecosystem of development is really designed to quantify these outputs in numerical numbers and defend our return on investment. We went there to do something, we went there to stamp out evil, and now it's time to bring ourselves back. And so the reality is, we say we're there to empower, to support, and in reality, we're taking care of ourselves and all that we have extracted. And so we're essentially sort of optimizing for all the objectives, but empowerment. Anyway, and so what I want to point out is that there have been development as an enterprise, colonization before that. The problem with it, and we spend so much time and energy trying to reform these systems, the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, they are all forever undergoing these long-term reform processes. Everyone's always re-strategizing, everyone's always under reform. And the problem with reform, as abolitionist Angela Davis has said, is reforms often render the institution more permanent. What that means is that we end up, reform efforts are often very good at bringing in detractors, bringing in the critics, getting them to work on things that basically, yes, solve the main criticism, but often just disguise it or hide it further. And by doing that, we get to make the institution itself more strong because we're able to say, well, we addressed this issue, we did that. And I think this is no longer good enough. I think so much of design work is tinkering at the edges. We're not really grappling with the structural forces, the structural policies, the structural mechanisms that continue to sustain oppression. And so when we talk about solidarity and we talk about systems change, I want to walk us through this framework that I'm not married to, but is something that I have been grappling with. Because right now, what I realize is that so many of those setting the answers are really on the, I don't have a pointer, but on the sort of in the companies and governments set of this table. We have governments basically saying, this is what we're going to do. We have the economic power, we have the political power, and then the companies and the moneyed special interests that get to buy our politicians effectively. We can't talk about what's going on in Afghanistan without talking about the defense contractors that are benefiting. And so we often say we all need to be involved, but really the power is concentrated to decide in a very specific part of all of us. And I recognize this is not a sort of fully comprehensive table. But I think the role that we have, the role that we have set for ourselves, they have to evolve. companies, we say, well, they just, in a sort of basic, economics 101 understanding. Well, corporations, their role is just to produce goods and services to meet people's needs. But so much of the way that is done with capitalism gone awry, it is not just unethical and unsustainable. It is deadly. It is devastating. It is monstrous. And governments are kind of standing by and letting it happen. We do a terrible job against protecting against corrupting interests. And as a result, how power is concentrated there, the rest of us are often, protesting. We're saying this is not good enough. Activists were protesting, but we're not really helping define the paths. We're saying this is so sad, this is so unjust, but we don't necessarily do the work of understanding at a granular level how systems work, how policies work, how the mechanics of them intersect. This is not true of everybody, but certainly for us sort of, weekend marchers, we're good at holding up the signs, but we're not good at saying sort of what next. And so it's all well and good to say, this is what we don't believe in, but then what do we believe in? And so I think that we need, we need to stand in all our power and understand how to use all of our different superpowers to design a radically different society. And what that means is I think we need to overturn who gets to ask which questions. Right now, with companies and governments asking what should our future look like, we are looking at a dystopian future that I don't think any of us are bought into or want to live in. But what if we had our artists with their power of radical imagination and our activists with their moral clarity and courage first setting out those questions? And then we bring those questions. The next step is then to have our grassroots groups that are already acting with such generosity and agility and creativity, already modeling for us what a future grounded in love and mutual care and solidarity look like, answering the question, what are paths to realizing this kind of future? And we're having researchers bringing their intellectual rigor, bringing their our think tanks, our journalists, our academics, understanding, mapping what are the paths and what are the flawed logics and the existing intellectual traditions that we have to dismantle to get there. And then finally, the third step is then bringing our governments and our companies with their production capacity, with their distribution capacity, with their resources and scale and durability to then say, this is how we execute. How do we set policies and organize markets to realize this future? The current way that this is done is absolutely flawed. It is backwards. The governments and companies are asking the questions, and then we're protesting on the fringes for crumbs after the parameters of debate, after the infrastructure has been set, which means it is always going to be difficult to overturn what has already been done until we get these sort of tiny, great, we're going to fly out 5,000, 9,000 people a day now. That's going to be, that's coming from the outburst of protest and support. That is not going to last very long, and that is not going to go very far. And so I think we have to fundamentally overturn who gets to ask what types of questions. And we have to think about our roles bigger than just protest. We have to sort of push forward the solutions that we believe in. And so we have to all harness our unique strengths across the table and recognize our limitations. And yeah, this is something that we can discuss in perhaps the discussion in Q&A. Oops, I'm going backwards now. Oh, apologies. I want to now talk about how I'm thinking about this in my own life and politics as I've been reflecting on the events of the last few days. And I just want to note that the next image might be slightly triggering. It represents a violent scene. And so just note that, and I'll note when we pass on. This is an image from 1947 in Taiwan, my home country. This is the 228 massacre that occurred in Taiwan. The quick context on that is after World War II, the US and the UK effectively handed the rule of Taiwan, then a Japanese colony, to the Chinese nationalists and to Chiang Kai-shek's army. This has happened without consulting any Taiwanese. And at first we were excited because we thought, well, if the Americans had brokered the deal, this must be a good thing. For America is a land of freedom. America is a land of democracy. And the American and the UN had set up offices within Taiwan to promote US-style democracy. There's propaganda distributed everywhere. There were flyers sort of sent out. And so when the Chinese nationalists started taking over and became a brutal authoritarian rule, we were very confused. We said, well, the Americans came and said they were going to free us. They said we were going to have democracy. And so we started protesting and we started organizing for American-style town halls. And there was actually a period where the Taiwanese could have simply toppled the Chiang Kai-shek regime and actually taking matters into our own hands. But we thought, okay, well, if the Americans had brokered the deal, let's wait. Let's wait and see what happens. And so we were in negotiations supported by the Americans, by the UN, and eventually, and while that was happening, the Chinese nationalists were sending more troops. Eventually, basically over the course of about a month, estimates vary, but at a minimum, it was about 30,000 people were killed in broad daylight overnight. At the time, we pleaded to the Americans, to the UN folks, literally at their gate, asking for them to save us, to say, we were organizing for what you asked for what you told us. We deserve. And for political and diplomatic reasons, they let the massacre happen. And this, I feel, is the cycles of history that we're seeing repeating and changing the image now. The amount of hypocrisy, the amount of lack of ethics, the lack of sort of a historical memory, I think is what continues to feed and exacerbate these cycles of conflict. And they keep showing up again and again. Earlier this year in Atlanta, there was a man, a 21-year-old man that shot 8 people, 6 of which were Asian women, I believe, in Atlanta, Georgia. And Biden, our empathetic president, condemned the violence against Asian Americans. Many folks said that this was because of Donald Trump, of his xenophobia and talking about Kung Flu. I mean, China has been the forever boogeyman in American politics, but I think it goes much more than that. There is a long history of fetishizing Asian women because of Western imperialism and US wars abroad that have had to dehumanize and use these women to service American GIs. The term yellow peril actually originated in Germany. I believe it was Kaiser Wilhelm II who had a dream once of Buddha rising in the East and armies of Chinese coming to overtake the Germans and the rest of Western civilization. These fears were unfounded. The Chinese had no such imperialist ambitions in the West, but I think that was my understanding, my reading of that history is that because of all the colonization efforts that Western European countries were engaged in, there was a lot of fear and nervousness that China, with all these people, were going to do the same thing to the West, that they were going to come and take over and enslave the Europeans, even though there were no such ambitions. So that is where the term yellow peril began. And so, yeah, you know, with these long histories of US forever wars abroad, you can't look at the Atlanta spa shootings without looking at these histories that have dehumanized an entire continent of people. And now, as we're seeing in Afghanistan again. I'm trained as a mediator and this is something that often sticks in my mind. In 80% of mediation cases, the final statement is framed in the narrative terms of the first person to speak. In the case of the Atlanta spa shootings, the police and the shooter said, this was not racism. This was not a sexual fetish. And so all the media reporting that came after that sort of started framing it in their terms and started asking, well, were these women sex workers? That is not the point. The point is that we're dealing with whorephobia, we're dealing with racism, we are dealing with sexism. In the case of Afghanistan, we are, I think so often what we do is we're looking at those that are powerful, what they're saying, and then we're trying to sort of reconstruct the narrative, the history from that. We're taking a we're taking an ahistorical approach to how we're understanding the current crisis. And, you know, with my people, right now, this is how we are framing our role in COVID. I believe that there's been over 7,000 cases of attack in the last year that have been self-reported. So the higher is probably a far number of attacks, discrimination, even murder of Asians in the US, and I think attacks in other places because of Kung Flu, China virus, whatnot. The person that speaks first has the power to define how everyone else frames the story after that. And you know what? I, like Aruna D'Souza, am sick and tired of having to defend my humanity and the humanity of people that I love. And I'm tired of walking in with my personas and my systems maps to people and trying to use those as tools to advance the personal development, the heart development, the self-development of those with power to get them to do the right thing. And I think back now to Assata Shakur's words. Nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them. And I think about this a lot now when I think about how I want to work, how I want to show up in the fights that are important to me, how I stand my ground, how I call up injustice, or how I call out injustice, how I call out hypocrisy. And I am working now harder and harder towards a practice that is not rooted in a politics of empathy, but in strong solidarity. Because empathy is not going to save us. We need structural justice that does not rely on the individual decisions of individual humans. And this requires grappling with history and power and context and ethics and equity, all things that powerful institutions like to avoid. And so in terms of how to do that, to be honest, when I was talking with Emmeline Vera right before we hopped on, I was saying that I'm not feeling very hopeful today. But I found comfort and solace in some of these lessons from the Puerto Rican and Jewish writer Aurora Levins Morales. This book was gifted to me by the amazing Cassie Robinson, and it's called Medicine Stories. And there are 5 lessons in here that when I think about my own solidarity practice, that I have found to be really grounding and nourishing and that have centered me and given me hope. And so I now offer these to you in the hopes that they will help do the same for you. The first tool that she's talking about is cultivating hope. And I think right now, given all the events that we talked about, it is very easy to lose hope. And she talks about my ability to think and imagine is a resource belonging to the commons of which I am a steward. I have a responsibility to increase my resistance to discouragement and despair. And I'm thinking a lot about that today. because it is very easy to sink into depression. It is very easy to take these traumatic and violent events and extrapolate them out to think about how history is repeating itself. We are never learning any lessons. This is just the doomscape that we're forever locked within. And I think that is what anxiety and depression is. But at the same time, I'm remembering to look around me at all the folks that are nourishing themselves, helping one another, helping their communities, and doing beautiful things. And we have a responsibility to ground in that gratitude and to increase our resistance to despair, because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere. We have to practice consciousness raising. We have to understand and map the way social injustice impacts us personally, and then also impacts us collectively. Because the exchange of stories, as Levins-Morales says, is the currency of transformation. And so I think for a long time, I was really focused on solving oppression out there, solving oppression sort of amongst other communities. And I lacked the framework and the understanding and the grounding to understand how it shows up in my own life. And I think the more that I'm doing that internal work and fighting against it in my own sort of day-to-day practices, the more that I'm seeing sort of how it connects to these interconnected histories and legacies and cycles of oppression. And it helps me, I think, connect with folks in different ways. The third, and I think her definition here, sort of drawing from Victor Lewis, is challenging. They say that solidarity must be unilateral, unconditional, and universal. And she says it means trying to be on everyone's side, recognizing that interrupting someone's inappropriate or oppressive behavior is being on their side. It is standing up for their full humanity. Something that I've been thinking about, lately is, okay, well, where do I donate my money? What are groups on the ground that are doing good work that I need to support? But I know sort of money alone is not enough. There's the Band-Aid, there's the quick fixes, but frankly, right now looking at, and sorry, my frame of reference right now is very much Afghanistan. But in any situation, I think, okay, well, where can I give money? But then beyond that, what do I do? Beyond centering and supporting and elevating the struggles of those that are closest to the issue and know what are needed, what do then I do? Being based in the US right now, having the type of access that I do, what does it mean to then build solidarity with folks that I despise or I think that are acting in oppressive ways or I think have blinders on? And I think this definition of solidarity is challenging to me, to say that, all folks generally want to do the right thing, but we are the products of our society, of a society that rewards, that incentivizes greed, inward-looking selfishness. This is what the neoliberal order has given us. And so what that means is also when I'm engaging with power holders, how do I also recognize their humanity and call out their behavior in a way that A, sort of gets them to sign on, but B still recognizes their humanity, their intentions, whatnot, because also that's also just a more effective advocacy strategy. I think right now, so much of activism today is really built on us yelling at one another through the media. And that is not particularly effective, because any legislative win, any policy win can be blocked 100 different ways in implementation. And so if you do not have folks on your side, and if we're not building sort of solidarity amongst all of us, even folks that we think are evil, are doing the wrong thing, whatnot, it is going to be very hard to have the scale and the sustainability of structurally just solutions that we seek. The fourth is she reminds us to collectivize our struggles. I think society tells us that all our struggles are individual. It is because we are lazy, we are not smart enough, we are not good enough. It is not because we are products of these unjust and capitalist structures. And so we have to join forces to create response to formally individual challenges. And I think this is why more and more of us I think technology is enabling things in different ways and enabling the sharing and the sharing of global struggles in different ways. I do not think we have yet figured out what that means for how we collectivize and organize around these global struggles. And this is something that I'm excited to talk about because it's something I'm actively thinking about. And then finally, I'm just really grateful to be here today because I think that it's easy to spiral into depression on your own, but anytime that you connect with others that are thinking the same, even if we do not yet have the answers, it is a step towards reclaiming these connections and fighting back against the compartmentalization, fighting back against the, well, I'm sad, but I don't have responsibility. Because if we come together and see how we can activate our different networks, history has shown that this is how change happens. And so these are reflections from Aurora Levins Morales, because I did not have my own today, but I have found care and hope and grounding in them, and I hope they serve you as well. Oops. And I'll close by thinking, by sort of bringing us back to this quote that was shared everywhere at the start of the pandemic by Arundhati Roy. And it seems like we are such a far place from where we were then. Historically, she said, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And I think when she said this, many of us took this up as our rallying cry. We thought, well, the Spanish flu brought around socialized medicine. This pandemic, this breaking away is a point where we can see massive change happens. And these were the headlines from early 2020. They're very different from the images that I showed at the beginning of this call. As I understand, and I think there's been some tracking of these, I think for the most part, these were temporary measures. And I think the folks that are keeping track of this database, as I understand, many of these are not, have not been sustained. And I think right now, when we look at whether it's the global vaccine rollout, or other tragedies, it is hard to, maintain hope. A year ago, we said all of humanity is connected. And even if, you don't believe in the politics and the progressivism and the inclusivity of it, we were helping one another because it was social, it was public health necessity. And today, we have, big pharma lobbying the World Trade Organization, with IP protections and preventing poor countries from creating their own vaccines. So it feels dystopian in many ways. But I think it is our job to cultivate the hope and think about how we also work in our own countries, wherever it is that you are based. So yeah, as I think about this image, it's giving me, I think, a lot to reflect on. I know that the work that I did in Afghanistan 10 years ago was technocratic. It was grounded in an academic understanding around what empowerment meant. And ultimately it was, it didn't go anywhere. It didn't make any difference. And I now think about, given my position, where is it that I can have more access and influence, and how do I support the friends and the communities that I met while I was there. And so, I'll end with this quote from Robin D.G. Kelley, who asks, where are we heading? How do we begin to dream ourselves out of the stark place of death and destruction and war, from the suffocating place where anyone who is not down with the war plan could be labeled a traitor? What shall we build on the ashes of a nightmare? And for me, today, in this moment, it is connecting with Vera and Emily. It is being here in community to just process the events we are together. I don't have definite answers, but I do recognize that I need to show up differently. And with that, I'm excited to chat with you both. Thank you.
Sorry, my mic was off. I don't know what to say, actually. I took a few notes, but this was a hard one. Thank you for being so honest with us and for sharing your despair, but also your hope. So that is a positive outlook here. Yeah, I'm grappling with words, as you can see. I'll just go back to the beginning of your talk. I'm kicking off this Q&A. It feels so not right, but then on the other side, that's what we're here for, right? To have a conversation. And I will start with something that may sound a little bit off, but then I think it is quite key. So what you describe is this grappling with terminology, also on top of grappling with, you know, what's behind, obviously, but you're grappling with words. You know, you try to make us understand how empathy is not the right word, because it carries, you know, a burden that is so full of things we don't want, and instead turn to another word, solidarity. And then you also described how, you know, the word empathy was also being used or misused for, you know, political reasons or commercial, whatever, as a marketing slogan, ultimately. And this is quite disheartening, because how do we protect the terminology, or do you think, is it enough to be aware, and whenever this, you know, this appropriation of terminology happens, to just turn to another word? What is your take on this?
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I'm someone who really likes words, and yet at the same time, I also often feel that we spend a lot of time nitpicking over words, right? So I don't want to do that, but you know, listen, I think empathy has a place and a role. What I push back against is that we are grounding our struggles for change in a politics of empathy, and feeling that, well, if we just convince enough people to be empathetic enough, then yes, then things can change. And that really reinforces the hierarchy that we see, that reinforces the hierarchy, that reinforces supremacy, and that removes, I think, agency from folks that are sort of calling for empathy from others. And I think, you know, so I think a lot about how I've been unwitting, I think for a long time how I've been an accomplice to that, you know. Rich people send me to poor place, collect the stories, package it up, we bring it back, we sort of put it up as posters, as reports. People go on stage and then talk about sort of how they did a thing that sort of just made a tiny dent, without you know, I think right now, you know, the development enterprise, I mean, so much of it is about absolving ourselves of our guilt and of our sins, right? So we sell weapons, we suppress trade, we prop up dictators, and then we give a tiny pittance in development aid to you know, bring clean water or to do whatnot. And it's just you know, maybe what we should be doing is not fucking up the climate, not suppressing trade, not propping up dictators, not selling weapons. And so I think about, you know, if we were to not just say, oh, those people are so poor, how, you know, what is the sort of current thing that we need to do to help them? But what would it look like to imagine a world where everybody's dignity and everybody's joy was honored and celebrated? And then what do we need to do to get there? And yeah, so yeah, like I appreciate the question. I'm not sure if I answered it, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Thanks, Panthea. I'll join in thanking you also for your very raw and very sort of important lecture, because it touches upon a variety of very important and deep topics that I think all of us have been struggling to put into words the kind of despair that has been permeating many different aspects of everyday life, from the smaller things in everyday life to the larger global topics, from, you know, as you've covered so well in your presentation. And I feel there are no direct questions that can be asked, but I really appreciate this gesture, this sort of hand that you've reached out to all of us today, basically inviting us to join you in this reflection. And I think that is a reflection that, when so many of us cannot put this into words, having your expert guidance guiding us into a way how we can in fact start thinking about this, start going about processing this individually, to then go on and process it collectively and understand that we are all in fact struggling with very similar issues, if not the same in many cases as well. I wanted to ask you maybe one question to sort of let and maybe perhaps that could be our final question for today, because I think we should all sit with the words that you have shared with us and sort of reflect. I think this is not a moment for a Q&A that is kind of a breezy end of lecture conversation, but for our audience who's watching live on YouTube, I think we should let people sort of sit, and then we will end this live stream and sort of join the team back in Pillnitz for a more informal conversation. I'm going to go to, American politics. You were talking about American politics. Obviously, you are situated in a part of the globe that has experienced dramatic, in Europe, we also see some of these changes happening, and to varying degrees. But of course, in the US, and because of the impact that the country has in also global politics, they are felt very strongly by a lot of other people in other parts of the world. And I've been observing with maybe hope and mild curiosity and sort of this childish enthusiasm sometimes, this sort of turn to activism that we have been seeing more spectacularly playing out in American politics in the last years, especially since 2016, which seemed to be a very big turning point for a lot of people, for a lot of young people, for a lot of community organizers that perhaps, hadn't been as active as before. And we've seen that change happening all the way up to Congress. And I'm thinking of somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all the other sort of new generation of Congresspeople that have been more vocal, more active, both on social media and in legislating and so on. And I'm a huge fan of AOC's lives on Instagram, which I follow, and kind of like I'm always excited about. After I hear them, I'm like, yes, okay, we can do something. It's like not all lost and so on. And she talks a lot about, if anyone has watched them, they are always about understanding that you're part of the problem, but you're also part of the solution, and that a big part of these issues start with educating oneself, having an interest for these topics, and really understanding that politics and democracy is everyone's business, and it's really part of our daily life. So I was wondering if you could potentially talk a little bit about that. I think you've really looked into that and sort of hinted at that in your talk, but I also was wondering if you could perhaps, telling us a little bit about this sort of self-responsibilization that seems to be part of everyone's journey nowadays, and more, and it will continue to be, perhaps. I don't know if you have some words about that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that, I guess in terms of, maybe, I think lots of us are right now trying to sort of do the work. And I think that, and I think we're in an interesting time, I think the pandemic sort of shook up a lot, the Black Lives Matter and the racial justice uprisings last year sort of shook up a lot, the Trump presidency here in the US, and there's a lot of worrying right-wing authoritarian sort of political dynamics across Europe right now. So our world is burning. The IPCC report that came out and said nothing new other than humans have caused climate change. But, you know, for the UN to say that, it was a big thing. I think we're all, I hope this moment feels different. I don't know, it does to me. I hope we are being shaken out of our comfortable and blissful relative ignorance. And I also think we have to be, I think we have to be demanding of ourselves in terms of asking deeper questions around why things are broken. And I think we also need to be gentle with ourselves and not punish ourselves for not awakening, knowing whatnot sooner. Something that I find really worrying in different spaces. I mean, I guess I want to say activism, but I think it's all around. You know, I think we often are quick to attack one another for using the wrong words or not being woke enough or, you know, whatever it is, not, you know. And I think we all have to recognize that we're all coming to this work from different angles and in different places. We have had an entire media ecosystem that has been teaching us that our problems are ours alone. What keeps the capitalist machine humming is it makes you feel sad and anxious. And then once you're sad and anxious, you just buy more stuff. You consume more experiences, you do more things. And like big corporations that own big media, that donate to politicians, you know, it's all about you just go do your duty at the ballot box every 4 years. And other than that, don't worry about it. You know, you just pay attention to like Brad and Angelina or whatever it is, the Kardashians, and don't worry your pretty little head about it. And I think we're seeing that is, I mean, I think folks have different types of awakenings. And I think particularly, people who have had historical privilege are having a ruder awakening, because there have been many for this, there has never been the pretense of everything is okay. And I think that is why, you know, I think so many folks are now discovering Black feminist writers or rediscovering Black feminist writers, you know, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks. I think sort of folks are sort of revisiting these classic texts because I think they're finding new wisdom and new sort of meaning and new hope in these. And I think it's that we often haven't in the past listened enough. We've been sort of lulled into this sense of comfort. And now and I think now, you know, kind of our planet's at a breaking point, our democracies are at a breaking point. It's coming out in the form of mass violence. And you have to wonder, like, is this what it's going to take for people to finally stop and pay attention? But also what I take hope in is that I think once folks are activated and awakened and engaged, you hope that it is easy to then sort of, it is harder to go back. But it's hard to then say, okay, what does it mean to sustain our practice in this? And the last thing I'll say is I do think this is a group of designers. I think designers are very good at breaking apart systems. This is what we do. You know, we're very good at analyzing systems, breaking them apart, mapping leverage points and whatnot. And I do think it's not designers, and I think the operating of logic of empathy is not enough, but I do think that designers can bring so much to this work because frankly, like, you know, whether it's the oppressive sort of economic structure that we live in, the military industrial complex, whatever it is, these are designed by powerful elites who have armies of highly paid economists and lawyers that have set up these structures that are impenetrable and very difficult and very expensive for other people to understand. And that is also why we don't engage. That is why we do the activism. We were like, this is broken. They say, okay, great, we'll do something. It looks like something, but you know, really the legal minutia of it, you don't actually have to make change. And I think what we're actually really good at doing is like, so taking like, and like a lot of my work is like sitting through like piles and piles of like, you know, legalese and like papers and trying to like dismantle, like deconstruct what it actually means. And also, you know, we're very good at facilitating and bringing in experts from different fields to help us sort of just break apart and dismantle these systems and structures, and then say, okay, who should be doing what? And I think that's something that, you know, beyond, I think just a, like personal and sort of nourishing and grounding and sort of, you know, hope practice, because hope has to be a discipline. I forget who first said that, but that's certainly not my, you know, but we have to practice hope as a discipline, and then also think, okay, given our sort of technical skills and what we're good at and what the world needs, how can we be most effective in intervening? So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you. Vera, do you want to wrap up? I think.
Sure. So I think we're going to close now the live stream on YouTube, and we're going to join the group in Pillnitz for a more informal discussion. Once again, thank you so much, Panthea, for sharing these words with us today. I think, as I said before, this is a lecture that we need to sit with and reflect upon. And I'm very thankful that you shared these thoughts with us today. I want to thank everybody for watching. Special thanks to our group in Pillnitz, who we will be joining soon. Thank you to Panthea. And have a good evening, everybody, or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the globe. Thank you.